Hey guys, so I received an email concerning chapter 2. I have a few students who are having a little bit, they're having some misconceptions with um, these piecewise functions and these intervals where we're talking about increasing, decreasing, and having constant intervals on a piecewise function. So let's talk through this together. This is one of your problems. If you go back and you look at your homework, you have probably the same exact problem or one very similar to it. So go back and look if you're having trouble. I will probably walk you through it step by step. All right, so this piecewise function is asking for three different pieces here. It's asking for me to determine where my function is increasing. I'm going to change these colors here. Where my function is decreasing, and then where my function is constant. So what I want to do is maybe let's discuss this function first. Let's kind of break it up into these particular intervals, and then we can actually write the answers down in the form that they want. So in red, I'm going to make my pen just a tad bit thicker. Okay, so I want to determine where this function is increasing. So what does it mean for a function to be increasing? There's technical definitions. Your textbook has them. You can read them. Layman's terms, that function is increasing if it is rising. If you're moving from left to right on your graph, that's the way we read our graph, just like you read in a book from left to right. When you're reading that graph, if you're moving from left to right on the x-axis and that function is increasing as you move that way, or if it's rising as you move from left to right, then that function is increasing. So an example of that, you always want to start at the left, okay? So right here, I'm low down, but you can see that up until that point, as I go to the left, that function increases. So because I'm gonna put that in red, because it is increasing, okay? But what about decreasing? Decreasing is when you are reading from left to right and that function goes down. So as I'm moving from left to right, you can see that this function is moving down. There at that spot. Now, a constant function is a function as you move from left to right, it does not increase nor decrease. The value of that function stays the same. So you guys can see that from here to here, that function neither increases nor decreases. It stays the same. It's a horizontal line. That value stays at -2. Your value is always your y value, your output. The value is a -2, where that straight line is at. All right. So now once I get here, what you notice is that function begins to increase again, because as I move from left to right, it rises, it increases, and then something happens, my function changes. This is why it's called a piecewise function. In my head, I think about this function consisting of many different pieces, right? So I have what looks like a quadratic, a little hilltop there. Then at the bottom of the hill, it's flat, and then I rise up, and then it's going to kind of plateau again. It's going to be flat again. And this last little flat piece, this constant piece, is going to be from here to infinity. And I don't want to confuse us, let's put an arrow on that end down there. So I've kind of color coded this thing for you guys. Um, so now you know where it's increasing, where it's decreasing, and where it's constant. The hard part many times can be figuring out how to write it in what we call interval. It's somewhere on here, I'm sure. There it is. Interval notation. And that's just kind of taking your answers. You're taking the x values and you're putting them either in parentheses or brackets. Okay? So let's talk about that for this piecewise function. What I know, what I want to do is in this first piece here, that's where it's asking where my function is increasing. So I want to take each one of those red pieces that I have, and I want to write them in interval notation. Well, what you notice is on the left side, I have an arrow, and it's going to the left forever. And what that means, my values are decreasing forever. There's no stopping it. There's no boundary there. There's nothing to say, hey, this is the minimum value, we're going to stop. So because it's decreasing forever, we're going to notate that first piece as negative infinity. But what is the maximum value for that red, this first little red piece here? The minimum was negative infinity because I have the arrow. The negative infinity was on this side. It looks like a -8. That's a negative infinity. Just let's do better. My negative infinity was on this side. I apologize. This happens sometimes with my hand touching the screen. The right side is right here. The important part is the x-axis. Where is that on the x-axis? Well, over here, let's erase this just a tad bit. That red line there is between -8 and -6. So what number is directly between -8 and -6? That is at -7. Guys, and I'm going to put a parentheses there. Now, let's think about parentheses and brackets, because on some of these, sometimes you have brackets depending on what's going on, and sometimes you have parentheses. Parentheses, that means that the endpoints are not included in the answer. When you have brackets, the endpoints that you have there aren't included in the answer. Well, look at -7. I'm saying that -7 is not included in the answer. In other words, at -7, I'm saying that function is not increasing. -7 is at that maximum point up there at the top. Well, what's happening at -7 is that my graph is going from increasing at -7, and then it's changing to decreasing. So at -7, I'm neither increasing nor decreasing. What I'm doing is I am changing direction. So that's why I can't use a bracket there. I have to use parentheses. So the first part of my answer is from negative infinity to -7. And then my second part is that second part in red. And again, guys, you remember I said the x-axis is the important part. So let's make room. I'm going to erase this. So it begins at -2, and it begins at -1. So even though it's kind of a long line, it's slanted, right? So my minimum value there is -2, and my greatest value on the x-axis is -1. And again, I use parentheses, guys, because I am not including those endpoints, because at those endpoints, I am changing direction. Okay. So what else do I have here? The second part is asking, where am I decreasing? Well, I only have one blue piece here where I am decreasing. I'm going to erase this so I can kind of see what's happening. At that decreasing portion, it begins to decrease at -7, where that increasing, remember we talked about changing direction. So at -7 it begins, and it ends here, which is at -6, looks like -5. So I decrease from -7 to -5, and again, I do not include those end values, those endpoints, because that's where I'm changing direction. And then the final piece here is asking, where is my function constant? I'm going to erase this a little bit. You can always pause the video if you're trying to write things down, because I look like I have a mess here. But this little piece is constant, and this big piece is constant. So what are the x values there? Well, that looks like -5. This looks like -2. And guys, if you break your intervals up with a pencil, and you write really neatly, you can erase things. Um, but you can see very easily that I literally have my interval notation there almost. I have that -5 and that -2. I just need to stick the parentheses between the two numbers. I mean the comma, and put the parentheses on the M. But I have another constant portion on my piecewise function, and that is the second green piece down here. And it begins at -1. Remember, we read from left to right. You always put your minimum value first, and then your maximum or your greatest value on the right. And what you notice is that there's an arrow on the end, and that's notating that that value is going to happen forever, right? My function is going to stay constant forever. So from -1 to infinity, because it's not changing ever again. Um, my function is going to be constant. So guys, this is your piecewise function, and this is interval notation for your increasing, decreasing, and constant intervals on the graph. If you have any questions with this, just shoot me an email.